Dear friends of the American Hellenic Chamber of Commerce, good evening. It is with great pleasure to welcome you on behalf of our chamber to our very interesting digital event today, with a topic that is quite timely and crucially important nowadays. Our digital conversation today is about the necessary skills for the future of work and the empowerment of people to their self-efficiency. Building human capacity is essential for every country that wants to be competitive in a rapidly changing world. All stereotypes of people who would remain in the same job for decades do not exist, partly because many of those jobs become obsolete as the time passes, and at the same time flexibility and mobility characterize the today's working environment. In our today's disruptive and at the same time competitive world, where people need to be more equipped with knowledge and skills that will enable them to obtain better jobs and have a successful career path, it's crucial to identify the best possible partnerships and the appropriate best practices to support the skills anticipation and matching, not only for the developer, but for all the working groups. Today's event is a result of the work being done in the Employment Committee of our Chamber. We'll have the pleasure to enjoy an interesting discussion with our panelists with great experience and knowledge on the subject, and whom I thank for their participation. I want to thank the Maximus company, sponsor of our event, and also the Athenian News Agency, our media partner today. I also thank the President, Mrs. Kousia, and the members of the Employment Committee, as well as the coordinator, Ms. Haidogenu, for their contribution and cooperation in the realization of this and other very interesting activities which we are planning for the future. Finally, I want to thank all of you who honor us with your presence in one more event of our chamber. We hope you will find our digital discussion today extremely interesting and useful. I will now pass the digital floor to the President of the Chamber, Mr. Nikolaos Bakatsalos, for his introduction remarks.
Thank you, Ilya. Dear ladies and gentlemen, for quite some time now, we find ourselves in uncharted waters, experiencing constant changes to what we previously took for granted. These new circumstances require a high degree of adaptability, flexibility, new priorities, as well as the development of a new culture. It is upon us, the institutions, academia, and the business community to shape the necessary skills that define the new work environment and do it in a sustainable way. The readiness to deal with these new conditions require more than just technical ability. Soft skills and emotional intelligence are important in navigating the new landscape of work, while at the same time, reskilling and upskilling are moving forward with a sense of urgency. These are the new kinds of challenges we face, from what's needed for a sustainable and productive work environment to the adoption of best practices to enhance labor market efficiency. We, the American Hellenic Chamber of Commerce and its Employment Committee, we're moving exactly in this direction, interacting with both the business and institutional establishments to discuss the challenges and opportunities generated by this inevitable transformation. With these thoughts and questions that arise in this complex, demanding, and challenging new environment, I would like to welcome you all today to our digital event, Skills for the Future of Work, Empower People to Self-Sufficiency, organized by our Employment Committee, featuring a very impressive array of speakers. I would like to thank you for being with us today and to congratulate the committee and look forward to an excellent and constructive discussion. And with these few words, I would like to pass the digital floor to Mr. Spiros Protopsautis, the governor of the Greek Public Employment Service. Mr. Protopsautis,
thank you.
And thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation to this wonderful event. The conversation today could not be more timely, as Greece is facing a very important challenge and at the same time a big opportunity, and one that it should definitely take advantage of and capitalize on in order to move to the next phase of growth and economic activity. There's no doubt that things are changing at a constant pace all around us, everywhere, from work life to home life, and everything in social life. Technology and the changes of the fourth industrial revolution are definitely playing a major role in how we live, how we work, how we do all activities. Needless to say, this has significant implications for the labor market, both here in Greece as well as abroad. This is a global phenomenon, a global trend, and one that all of us who deal with employment issues need to think very carefully about and plan ahead in order to make sure that we are ready to address all the issues that are emerging. We have a major paradox here in Greece. A country with 16% unemployment rate has over 1/3 of its businesses reporting difficulty finding employees for its open positions. This is obviously a result of a widespread skills mismatch, and international studies confirm that indeed Greece has a persistent and significant mismatch issue in the labor market. According to the European Skills Index, Greece ranks dead last among its peers when it comes to the area of matching the needs of the employers with the skills of its workers. This is something that the government has recognized and has made a top priority to tackle in the coming period, in the next period. One of the major instruments at our disposal for addressing this issue, and one that we intend to use to the fullest extent, is the European Recovery and Resilience Facility. As many of you know, Greece has submitted a very ambitious, bold, and comprehensive plan for a sustainable recovery and a quick return to the path of economic growth, a plan that, if implemented correctly, is really going to mark a significant turning point in the development of the nation. In this plan, Greece is proposing to invest over 1 billion euros for a massive upskilling and reskilling program of its labor force in order to provide the necessary skills that the workers need to have to meet the needs of today's economy, of today's global, knowledge-based and technology-driven economy. As a result, the focus of the proposal includes significant investments in digital skills as well as green skills, but also in a number of other categories of occupations that have high demand, high growth potential, and do not have adequate supply of labor currently. This involves a lot of technical occupations, which means that this investment needs to be coupled with a significant reform of our vocational education and training systems, which are also included at other parts of the plan. The overall idea here is that Greece needs to avoid repeating mistakes of the past. Lots of funds, European funds in the past, have been spent but have not been invested. There's a very important difference between the two. It's one thing spending funds, it's another thing investing funds. And what we are proposing is investing in the most important capital of the country, which is its human capital. So we believe that through a new system of workforce development, which Greece has never truly built, that works parallel to the education system and similar to the systems that have been built in countries like the US, the UK, and others, where there's a particular plan for providing rapid, focused, customized training, short-term training to both the unemployed and the underemployed, as well as the employed who are looking to do a career shift. We believe that we can, in a very short period of time, decrease the skills match by increasing the skills of the workers. We are designing a system that's going to be performance-based, that's going to be data-driven, that's going to focus on quality control, and that's going to hold all stakeholders accountable for results. What we want to avoid doing is spending money with nothing to show for it. What we are focused on, laser-like, is increasing the ROI on the training euros that are going to be spent through the Recovery and Resilience Facility in order to get the maximum return, the maximum impact in closing the skills mismatch and increasing the productivity, employability, and competitiveness of the Greek labor force. As the Pisaridis Commission report clearly identified, the skilling of the Greek labor force is a necessary element for a pro-growth, sustainable growth agenda in the coming years. That is why Greece is investing in this area, and we truly hope that this is going to be an opportunity that's going to transform the way that the labor force in Greece has been trained to date and is going to turn the page and take us into a new era of quality, accountable, results-oriented training system. In this process, we all need to work on this together. The government can't do it alone. Social partners, chambers of commerce, private industry, needless to say, all need to work together to make sure that this time the investments are going to have the maximum return. In order to do this, one of the main prerequisites is going to be that we need to listen and monitor the needs of the labor market, the needs of the employers. The jobs that are going to be created in 2030, we don't even know yet. We know that at least 40% of the workers are going to need some sort of training or retraining in the next few years because of the changing economy and the occupational shifts that are occurring. So with that in mind, we have a bold plan in place that I truly believe is going to make a big, big difference in Greece's standing in the world economy and in the region. OAED, the Public Employment Service of Greece, has already started taking steps in that direction. During the pandemic, we established partnerships with tech giants such as Google, Amazon, Cisco, Coursera, and we are building partnerships with other companies to provide quality upskilling programs, especially focused on digital skills, digital marketing, cybersecurity, cloud technology and services, and a number of other areas, so we can train young unemployed people to suddenly acquire these high demand skills and enter the labor market. We help by subsidizing the employment, sort of like a full paid internship where OAED covers the full cost as a hiring incentive for the companies in order for the workers, for the young unemployed who finish the skilling program to gain the necessary hands-on experience that they need in the workplace. And this very fruitful and successful partnership with tech companies is a very good guide as to how we want to proceed in the coming months within the context of the RRF. At the same time, it's very, very important to finally break the barriers between industry and vocational education and training. We believe that in order for vocational education and training to be effective, it needs to be responsive to the needs of the employers. It needs to involve employers in the design of curricula and programs in order to make sure that what students are learning in the classroom, in the lab, and in the practical training aspects of their education actually are relevant to what the companies need. The whole purpose of vocational education and training is for students to graduate job ready on day one to enter the labor market and succeed. So we are at a very critical point where we're either going to make a giant step forward, and this is what this government has proposed to do and has decided to do and will move forward on, in the area of skilling and upgrading the knowledge and the qualifications of its labor force. The last thing I would like to add before closing is that change needs to be bold, needs to have a plan, and needs to have the partnerships that are absolutely necessary in order for something to be successful. OAED can go at it alone. I believe government can go at it alone. We all need to work together to make this happen. Today's event signifies how important this partnership is, and it signals that chambers, employers, the private sector want to contribute, want to help, and want to have a dialogue for us to find the optimal solutions to these challenges that all advanced and industrialized nations are facing in the context of the fourth industrial revolution. I believe, though, that at the end of the day, we're going to be successful. I truly think that the plan that we have submitted for the Recovery and Resilience Facility is a very forward-looking yet realistic plan that, if implemented correctly, is going to bring a sea change in this area of policy. And I look forward to our ongoing collaboration, dialogue, and partnership with the American Hellenic Chamber of Commerce and with all representatives of private industry in Greece, in order for us to make sure that that this happens. I already got one question from the private chat, and so I just want to answer since I have the opportunity. The training that we have proposed covers the entire labor force. That means both employed and unemployed. We recognize the need for skills upgrading across the board. Look, the old model of education, I go to high school, I go to college, I get a degree, and then I get a job that I end up spending 20, 30 years and then retiring. That model is over. Today, it's absolutely clear to everyone, I hope, that education is a continuing process, a lifelong process, one where we constantly need to provide opportunities for upskilling, reskilling, and making sure that we remain competitive and relevant in the labor force. This means that everyone, at some point in their career, multiple times in their careers, are going to have to set foot again in the classroom, whether in person or virtual. But they are going to have to participate in some form of training program. This has been recognized globally, and it's time for us to translate this realization in actual policy making and policy design here in Greece. And that's exactly what this government is doing, with a clear plan, with specific goals, and hopefully soon with a National Skills Council and a National Skills Strategy for the next period of years. With that, I would like to end my comments. I would like to thank you again for the opportunity to join you today. Just from looking at the list of speakers, I'm absolutely convinced this is going to be a fascinating conversation. And thanks so much to Chamber for this initiative and for organizing this wonderful event. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Protopsaltis, for your comments. Dear ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our event. Good morning for those that they are seeing us from the United States. Good afternoon to all the remaining in Europe. We are organizing for a second year in a row a digital event to discuss about employment evolution and particularly the evolution in skills. Skills evolution is not new. Skills mismatch is not new, as already Mr. Protopsaltis has recognized. Skills evolved as everyday business life evolves. However, COVID-19 has accentuated the issue, and I believe that we are talking about a real problem which needs fast action. Not quick fix, but quick wins, definitely. Speed matters for once more. Those who can attract talent can implement their strategies. Those who aspire innovative strategies and disruptive plans without taking into serious consideration the lack of skills may realize that Drucker, when saying that strategic plans are commodity and implementation is a very fine art, was correct, as implementation involves human capital. In Greece, apart from all the market distortions due to COVID, we already had some 100,000 of long-term unemployed people with very low morale, I would say with depression. Usually the less privileged, such as the elderly, the younger, the low-skilled, the low-income families, people from secluded villages or islands, people with a stigma from social life, or people with disabilities should be reskilled, should have the possibility to work and have a meaning in life. And providing skills, in our mind, does not apply only to the privileged ones, not only to the ones that they are in the market already. It applies to all the others. Unfortunately, the minister is not with us today, as they are discussing the law in the parliament. So we are expecting her input another time. Today we have a panel with international experts to present how partnerships can be effective in providing solutions concerning the skills and empower these less privileged parts of our working population. Our first speaker is Tiziano Barone. Ms. Barone is not someone that I don't know. We have worked together while he was at Manpower and I was at Manpower on a European project undertaken by Greece. How to put in the market students and how to put people in the market from south to south. So apart from knowing him from Manpower, he is not any longer at Manpower. I'm not any longer at Manpower. He works with Veneto Lavoro, an instrumental body of the region, where Mr. Barone is a director. So the main activity of Veneto Lavoro, although it is regional, is public employment services and management of active policies in public-private collaboration. Please keep your questions, as we are going to have answers at the end of all discussions. Hi, Tiziano. I'm very glad to have you with us today.
Hi, Venezia. Hi, Venezia.
The floor is yours. The digital floor is yours, Tiziano.
Okay. Thank you very much for this meeting. I'm speaking about the role of the partnership in the employment support services, job services. In our country and in our region, the recovery plan could be the real opportunity to increase our system. In this plan, the main results, the main activities on the labor market are strengthening active labor market policies and vocational training. And the second is strengthen the employment centers, public employment services. These are the two main targets that recovery plan is focused. In fact, in the details, the reform of the active policies and vocational training is an important aim. It supports vocational retraining and the reintegration path for workers, in transition for unemployment and defines with the region the essential levels of training activities for the most vulnerable categories. In the second part, our country is going to adoption the National New Skills Plan promoted by the Ministry of Labor and Social Policies in collaboration with the regions. The aim of recognizing the trainings of workers in transition and the unemployed through the strengthening of the vocational training system and the definition of essential levels of quality for upskilling and reskilling activities in favor of all the people that no have skills for going to the labor market. What are the main activities that we have in front of us? We live with 4 characteristics in the labor market. The first is destruction and reconstruction of jobs. The second is mismatching of supply and demand. The third is permanent high and low qualification. These are 3 characteristics of our regional labor market. The second aim is public employment services means first aid for activation. Application for versus vacancies from public employment services and authorized private body are an important area of activity in our region. Participation in active policies means internship, training, and accompaniment to relocation. The collaboration between public and private body in the labor market policy is important with the authorized private body in specialist activities and in order to the public employment services, the main labor market is internship. The direction of the activities is gathering the unemployed people versus stable work. The target of our services, job services, are up to 3 months online and offline information to the unemployed people. From 3 months to 1 year, relocation and short training. From 1 to 2 year, long training and relocation, and then other target in order to the disabled and disadvantaged people. The cost of the labor market policies are recognized based of the result. This is an important question, and at the moment, at a regional level, the measure has a characteristic of universally present for youth and adults unemployed. How much is our level of unemployed people? Monthly in Veneto region, we have from 10 to 12,000 unemployment per month. Means people that has done a declaration of immediate availability. These are the point of the entry point for our system. The network of public employment services in Veneto Lavoro has these three missions about infrastructure, organizational, information, and knowledge infrastructures. It's very important to remember that 60% of the unemployed in our region do not have digital skills and tools. This is an important question for thinking about the labor market policies. The destruction and the rebuilding of the workplace has this visual that you can see about the variation of employment position and the changes in the sectors of employment position. The second matter is the polarization of low and high qualification. From 2008, the labor market has this characteristic, and the third characteristic is the mismatch in supply and demand. The meaning of this mismatching is very easy: reduced number of candidates and inadequacy, hard and soft skills of candidates. In order to the active measure in our region, this is the graphic of the performance. Youth guarantee early activation and placement rate at 1 year for 75% of the people that is inside this measure. At 24 months, the share is so close to 90%. It's very important. This is an example of using the administrative data to monitoring and evaluate the policy. In order to our organization, we have two operators: the case manager. The main activity of the case manager is entrust each new employer to one operator to assume the responsibility for their care and coordinates and monitors the entire process of job placement. This is a new organization that we have done in this year. The second is the account manager facing the enterprises and focused on the business portfolio and reaching the vacancies. The main active policies in our region are these: youth guarantee and assegno per il lavoro is now I'm explaining about this, and the work experience. The measurement tools in this active policies are youth training and internship. And now I'm giving a little more information about the check for work. The job seeker in Veneto region are supported with an allowance up to 5,000 euro in services. So far, the measure has supported 52,000 employed people in 2 years and a half. It is a form of fruitful collaboration between public and private employment services. Since October 2018, the government of the Veneto region has offered a check for work to unemployed people over the age of 30 years old. With the allowance, the unemployed are supported in their search for work with information services, guidance and counseling, training and support for insertion, reintegration into the labor market. Once the employment benefit has been granted to applicants, the employment sector defines the employability of the unemployed person. Once the compensation has been received, the workers has 30 days to choose one of the 100 accredited bodies for employment services, for public employment service in Veneto region, that can implement the measure with 400 offices available throughout the region. Part of this allowance can be used only for training, such as language or IT certification of personal development. The accredited bodies are the private sector employment services, such as G Group, Humana, Decum, Empower, which receive most of the allowance when the candidates sign the employment contract lasting at least 6 months, also for temporary work. This is a very important measure, the main in our country, in our region. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, my dear Tiziano. I have noticed some differences with how the system used to work and how it works now. And I noticed that you cooperate with temporary agencies now in order to facilitate the market, and that you have case managers. Very interesting to see it more closely a little bit later. Let's pass the digital floor to Mrs. Luizou. She is the Secretary General in Tourism Policy and Development. She is an expert on strategic planning as well as on market reforms planning and implementation. Tourism, we all know it's a very big sector for the Greek economy and participates for more than 12%, if I'm not mistaken, in our GDP. And far more in employment figures. However, the majority of roles and positions, I'm afraid, are low quality and with low and unsecure or even gray wages and poor working conditions. On top of all this, during COVID, tourism was lost for very many people, and they have to settle on government subsidies. Dear Ms. Luizou, please share with us the challenges and the priorities of the tourist sectors, and how do you anticipate to solve this skills issue? I know it is not your only mandate. I mean, it is not up to you, but you are the one who you are involved in the difficult tasks. What are the conditions that we need to create and maintain so that tourism and unemployment will not be in the future so closely linked? Dear Ms. Luizou, the floor is yours.
Thank you, dear Venetia, and thank you for the invitation. Thank you. It is really an honor for me participating in this very interesting conference and discussion. The conservation of sustainable use of resources, natural, social, and cultural, is crucial, makes long-term business sense, and combines perfectly with the International Organization's definition of sustainable tourism, composed of 3 pillars: social, economic, and environmental. And at the same time, acknowledging the vulnerability, as you said, of the tourism ecosystem to external factors and shocks, such as the very competitive global playing field in tourism and the pandemic, our intention is to change our tourism business model and adapt it to the new era in front of us. The pandemic has brought tourism to its knees. Now it needs to stand up and restart in the new environment already shaped by technological developments. These developments have brought about great benefits, but also added extra urgency to the need for changes in the world of tourism employment. In response to the pandemic, many governments worldwide have reacted quickly by taking steps to address critical and skill gaps to maintain business operations. The big challenge for today's tourism policy and decision makers is to act immediately and with the right actions that will boost tourism development for the next decade. In the case of Greece, the tourism sector, as you already mentioned, is the main driver of development, as it contributes to more than 20% of GDP and employs 25% of the Greek workforce. The tourism ecosystem consists mainly of micro, small, medium enterprises that form the backbone of the Greek tourism product. Despite the service quality spectrum in the hospitality and catering sector, from bed and breakfast to five-star boutique hotels, Greek tourism SMEs are mainly family-run, with first or second generation owners, often lacking traditional entrepreneurial or managerial skills, and most importantly, digital literacy that will guide them to the present and future era. Progress in digital transformation of the Greek tourism industry remains slow compared to other EU countries, despite major tourist destinations' improved online presence. In this vein, interventions officially supported should aim to intensify the assimilation of digital technologies in tourism, harmonize the digital advancement along different facets of the tourism industry, and improve directly or indirectly the visitor experience by diversifying or redesigning the Greek tourist product. The advancement of new business models in tourism, such as the prevalence of international platforms for short-term rental accommodation, the growing demand for tourist personalized, dynamic and quality experience and services, as well the dynamic environment on e-booking management and travel planning, are drastically changing the map of tourism services. The Ministry of Tourism has contributed to the national digital transformation strategy by analyzing the challenges and opportunities through a series of expert consultations. This consultation brought together a total of 29 key stakeholders from the public and the private sector and identified the increasing dependence of tourism businesses on online travel agents and social media platforms. At this point, we should also mention that the consultation results were in line with the study of the European Centre of the Development of Vocational Training, CEDEFOP, which emphasizes the importance of soft skills in tourism. The consultation revealed that tourism SMEs providing online booking and payment from their own website, substituting major aggregators, are lately becoming a strong trend in Greece. It also revealed a series of digital skills gap around work from home schedules and the rotation of digitally unskilled personnel. It seems that the COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated the course of digital transformation events and has emphasized the need for changes that have been lingering for years. Shortcomings in digital skills were also identified in hospitality workers concerning training in hotel management systems and global reservation systems, as well as in digital marketing. The need for employees and managers of tourism companies to become familiar with all digital solutions and not only with technologies related to digital marketing and its online presence is of utmost importance. The limited knowledge of digital solution does not allow companies to benefit from digitalization. Furthermore, the lack of a labor force that views tourism as a career, they do not really see tourism as a career opportunity, and this was really emphasized in this consultation. The pandemic increased the volume of tourism workers. Most of them really look for employment opportunities elsewhere. The digital transformation affects all links of the tourist value chain, from the configuration of visitors' choices and the way the tourist companies communicate with the customers, to the distribution of the tourist product, the offer of innovative tourist services, and business organization. The recent crisis, the COVID-19 crisis, has also demonstrated the importance of tourism as an economic force and a driver for social cohesion and inclusion. An important part concerns the skills of those employed in tourism, both employees and managers. Tourism education curricula and vocational training sessions will also have to be updated to reflect the new emerging realities and scenarios. New specializations need to be integrated into educational and vocational processes, creating opportunities and, above all, challenges while preparing the tourism workforce for a digital future, which requires stronger coordination among competent bodies, education providers, and the industry. Professionals have pointed out that the lack of specialized education and vocational training for certain tourism forms and tourist businesses was like, let's say, in congress organizers or even in car rentals, even more marinas. Tourism schools should be, though, better equipped to help their students become familiar with digital tools used by the tourism market in parallel with the mainstream training. Continuous vocational education is considered valuable and should be further enhanced even after graduation, with the aim to constantly update knowledge and skills. Resilience has become the main compass for EU tourism and a guide towards reskilling of people who have lost their jobs or who are likely to do so to accelerate the technological change. In particular, effective green reskilling in tourism could contribute to more inclusive job growth, countering trends which can exacerbate labor market inequalities. The recovery of tourism sector must be based on sustainability, which will allow the rebuilding of tourism activity under the commitment to do better and with higher levels of security for an economic and social and environmental point of view. Reopening the tourism economy and rebuilding destinations will require a more coordinated approach due to the interdependent nature of tourism services. Preparing for recovery, Preparing for recovery and shaping tourism for the day after involves rethinking tourism by promoting investments and digital innovation hubs, and by improving the evidence base for decision-making and monitoring progress. In the framework of recovery and resilience plan, investment in human resources aims at the upskilling and reskilling of the workforce of the tourism sector, seasonal workers, the long-term unemployed, as well as the employees that entered into contract suspension due to COVID-19 crisis. The reskilling programs will cover different specialization, reception services and digital skills, food services and safety skills, culinary art, confectionery art, housekeeping services and environmental management, as well as marketing and new trends of thematic tourism in order to be closely connected to the scope of the RRF Tourism Development Project and building blocks of the new growth model for sustainable tourism development proposed by the Ministry of Tourism. This approach presupposes effective cooperation between the central government and the local and regional authorities for the planning and implementation of sustainable tourism policy. The latest legislative adjustments put forward by the Ministry of Tourism promote the solid institutional regulation of issues that will contribute to the sustainable development of Greek tourism, introducing critical and technical issues related to the operation of the tourism market. A key component to the effectiveness of digital tools is based on the familiarization of users, namely the workforce, the open availability of high quality and aesthetic digitized content that will strengthen and facilitate the production of applications, websites, promotions, and journalistic travel for tourism. The openly available digital material is expected to inspire the creativity and imagination of those who implement applications and digital actions, and at the same time to spread on social networks, multiplying the promotion and recognizability of the Greek tourism product. Due to the number and diversification of tourism products, as well as the various thematic forms of tourism, sea and sun, gastronomic, religious, medical, wellness, educational, conference, agritourism, so many forms of tourism, it is necessary to produce specific content per thematic area. The continuous enhancement of Greece's online presence requires the development of demand-driven activities to address the targeted audience and enrich the personalized experience. The importance of developing a common policy between European countries to ensure tourism and travel security was also one of the priorities highlighted at the 66th meeting of the Regional Committee for Europe of the World Tourism Organization held in Athens some days ago on the 2nd and 4th of June, attended by more than 15 ministers and secretary generals and representatives of the global tourism industry. Remote working was brought up as a means for contributing a fundamental change for insular destinations, promoting the importance of transport policies, as well as the role of technology into making transportation more efficient. A vision of working together to find ways to reintroduce mobility with smaller groups and diverse options will lead to less impactful digitalized services aiming at a sustainable development of overcrowded destinations. The contribution of new opportunities to more inclusive job growth and reduce inequalities may be achieved through environmentally safe, zero carbon footprint practices spread over several regions and not concentrated on a few destinations, prioritizing quality tourism by developing responsible, eco-friendly, enhances and encourages proximity, territorial cohesion, and focus on cultural heritage. In conclusion, even though the importance of digital upscaling is widely acknowledged by both tourism experts and authorities, trainings and seminars remain yet to be further addressed and catered for. There is an imperative need for new incentives to engage the tourism workforce to join institutional decision makers, as is the ministry, in the upscaling process of embodying the culture of digital change. Upskilling and reskilling actions improve visitor handling, information, management, and contribute to the personalization of the tourism experience. This is the most important investment we should all support and engage in. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Louise. This was a very ambitious, allow me to say, so many things that you are planning, and I'm sure that you will achieve to prolong the tourist period, and you effectively use the months that they are not working with training, I suppose, because on the one hand, we are going to give them a lot and to invest them a lot, so that the period, the 1 month, it's all will not be enough. We need to prolong it. And it was music to my ear because you reiterated the word cooperation and coordination. And I understood that we will have many things more to do together with the chamber as well. Thank you very much. I hope that you can stay for the discussion later. So, our dear guests will have questions to address to you. Now we pass to Olga Striska, who is a senior skills and employability specialist at the ILO in Geneva. She is an area lead of the work on skill strategies for future labor markets, focusing on anticipating skill needs for the future of work, skills for trade and economic diversification, skills for environmental sustainability and climate action, and skills for technological change and digitalization. Last autumn, I was privileged enough to attend a training, an e-learning course offering a certificate on achievement on skills, anticipation, and matching. She was leading it. I have been impressed to find out, except of the quality of the program, but I was impressed to find out that the country does not need to be rich in order to have a good quality mechanism as far as skills anticipation is concerned. I hope I understood correctly, dear Olga. The country needs to be focused on the problem and determined to work in partnerships, in social dialogue, using effectively the social dialogue and the common language, and skills anticipation mechanism help in that. So it needs the engagement of all of the stakeholders to develop and pursue a smart plan. Dear Mrs. Striska, please share with us how partnerships can assist in the skills anticipation issue. I was thrilled to have followed that program, and I would like you to share some things that they would bring us closer to actions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Venetia, and thank you for your kind words and also for the opportunity for the ILO to share some of our findings and practices as well. So I was asked to make a small input on the role of sectoral approaches because, as Venetia mentioned, they are popular across the world, no matter whether rich country or poor country, and for a good reason, they really work. They work for the identification of skills in the context of the future of work. But before we speak about sectoral approaches themselves, just a couple of words on the future of work itself. You probably have come across already you have probably come across the ILO initiative on the future of work and our centenary declaration, which was adopted last year, which is shaped around human-centered agenda. Why is it so important? Because the world is going through multiple changes. And of course, these changes, they didn't come yesterday. They've been always here. This is mobility, this is climate change, environmental degradation, this is technological change and digitalization, globalization and trade, and demographic change. They haven't started recently. This has been always with us. But the difference is that the pace of change is, of course, very different now. And there are some worrying estimates that, for example, we know that for climate change as well as digitalization, there are estimates if the climate change policy is implemented, perhaps some jobs may be gone. So, for instance, the climate change may take away jobs in the mining sector or in other fossil fuel energy generation or in traditional methods of manufacturing or agriculture. However, we also know that many new jobs will be created, and eventually the employment impact from digitalization as well as climate change policies implementation will be positive. However, it's in the long run. In the short run, there might be quite painful transition because the society and the economy has to adjust. And in order to adjust, of course, we need to skill people. We need to skill people, and that cannot be left just to the workforce itself. It's not only the obligation and perhaps also the right of people who undergo that transition, but also of the whole society and economy, all parties, public policies, government administration, as well as private sector, including employers, to contribute to reskilling of workers. And now, while we're speaking about all these mega trends and how they influence jobs, tasks in those jobs, and therefore skills and qualifications, we should not also forget that we are finding ourselves in the situation of the COVID-19. The situation for Greece has been discussed already by previous speakers, but in the ILO we know that globally in 2020 we lost around close to 9% of working hours, and that translates into 252 million full-time jobs. Of course, some of that goes into reduced working hours, but people remain in the job, so they sustain at least partially their income. But what is worrying, we know that over 30 million people went into unemployment in 2020. It's a really big increase. But what is even more worrying is that 81 million withdrew from the labor force. So they don't appear in the unemployment figures. These people quit the labor market altogether. And that means that they are de-skilling. That means that once the economy starts recovering, there might not be access to people. There might not be access to skills. And multiplied by the demographic changes we have, it might result in a major skill shortage as well and labor shortage. So this all is very disruptive, and therefore it's so important for us to anticipate skills and match skills with the demand, not only for today, but also for tomorrow. That's why we have the whole program on skill needs anticipation, and I'm so happy, Venetia, you enjoyed the capacity development course, one of our capacity development courses on this subject, and you found it useful. We have also a lot of guiding materials. I'll show some of that. But what is important to say, we say skill needs anticipation, so it's not just forecasting. Forecasting is something quantitative where you would imagine some precise numbers. We actually think that what is important about anticipation, it's not the precise numbers. No, it's a strategic way which would put the development of skills, retraining, upskilling, reskilling, lifelong learning, because people are now exposed to multiple traditions during their lifetime, and therefore to sustain that transition in a smooth way for the economy and the society, one needs to reskill throughout the lifetime. So all this has to be coordinated with broader policies, such as climate change, such as digitalization, such as trade, investment, industrial policies. And that's why we speak about strategic way, be strategic. But we also speak about systemic approach. So this is not just one-off exercise. This is really, if you implement something, make sure it's just something regular. You build a system which will function in the longer term. And in order to make this system functioning in the long term, you need a very well-established social dialogue between education, training providers, employers, workers, and government. So it's really kind of quadruple, but in fact, there are also other stakeholders participating. And as it just happens, so it is easier to do at sectoral level, where every partner is clear, objectives are clear, and they're easier also to achieve. In terms of the policy cycle, of course, if you think I need to implement some skilling program, it could be a short-term program, could be a longer-term program. But nevertheless, there is always a space for the implementation. Before you implement, however, you actually need to know to implement for what? For what type of jobs? You don't want to skill people, invest into that training, and then find out that these people do not get into employment. This will be really a loss of returns on investments for all those parties who contribute. And they will say it should be multi-party co-financing of skilling of the workforce. All parties will lose. Therefore, we really need to know which skills will be needed. And once you know, of course, you can implement, deliver those skills, but then also you need to monitor the situation and evaluate whether people really got into jobs, and then feed that information back into the skill needs anticipation system and the implementation. So this is the whole idea. And now, just before going into the sectoral approaches, one more thing. When we speak about skill needs anticipation system, because you heard me, I said the system, of course it's important for us to have data to collect labor market information. Of course it's important to have methods and tools available in order to produce that analysis of this information. Of course it's important to have analytical capacities in institutions capable of producing this analysis. But what is the most important, and without which the system is completely falling apart, are institutional mechanisms. Because these mechanisms establish the coherence of policies, they support the dialogue, the social dialogue, which I already mentioned, and they support coordination. Of course, these mechanisms should be available at national level, but what is also important to have them at sectoral levels. Why sectoral level? It's because, the key drivers of change which I mentioned, they become very clear at sectoral level, and they're also quite specific. If you discuss each driver of change at sectoral level, you actually get the quite precise picture of what is happening in terms of jobs destruction, job creation, the creative destruction of jobs. Even, the disruptive character of the COVID-19 becomes really contextualized. You have clear stakeholders, clear partners with whom you can get a certain commitment, not only in finding out what is needed for the sector, but also in the implementation. You can facilitate the coordination and collaboration and a dialogue in a very practical way. Also, when you implement the sector skill needs and identification anticipation activity, and then subsequently training itself at sectoral level, you reduce the complexity of intervention to a very practical level, because even though it might be quite a big sector, it's still much easier to go deeper into insights on skill needs, especially if you select strategically important sectors, or the sectors which are part of the industrial programs, for example, or prioritized through investments, or just sectors which are important for the economy, just like the one which was presented by the previous speaker, tourism. You speak concretely of what is needed for this sector in order to be more competitive, to succeed in global markets, and also to overcome the crisis, what kind of jobs will be available. And then you can go to the granular level of skills and competencies. You can link easily to investment and industrial policies. And also you don't need to rely on some complex statistics, because you can do this through foresight, you can collect data through qualitative methods. It's just easier. You don't have to overcomplicate. Of course, it's nice when it's supported by some sectoral level skills bodies. And there is the whole variety of sectoral skills bodies available around the world with different practices, starting from sectoral skills councils, which have been implemented in many countries, industry skills and training councils, such as in Singapore, industry skills councils, sectoral skills councils and industry skills councils, they're basically synonymous. These are probably the most frequent examples around the world. But also, sometimes we have some specific sector education and training authorities. So these are really bodies that have a mandate to decide about where to invest in education and training, because they are based also on the levy funding system. So this is the example of South Africa. Industry training organizations that have been, for example, in the framework of the COVID-19, they were crucial in providing response per sector in New Zealand. So these are just some examples. In terms of methods, again, at sectoral level, you can implement any method. You can do an establishment skills survey to find out which skills are needed and which gaps are experienced by employers. You can ask experts through a Delphi survey. You can construct a specific question based discussion of a focus group. You can implement a very participative method of foresight, where all stakeholders come together and they all construct a common vision, and then they all decide together what it would take in order to achieve that mission vision. You can, of course, project and estimate with quantitative methods if they're available in the country. But if they're not, it's not a big deal. There are lots of alternatives. You can use, of course, now big data also, for Greece, this is something feasible. And you can also combine everything I mentioned before and achieve actually an added value through combining these different resources. So I just brought some examples we use in the ILO of the approaches we use in countries when we help countries to implement them. We have this tool which is called Skills Technology Foresight. And it's implemented specifically at sectoral level for those sectors where digitalization and technological change are an important player. And this actually affects a lot of sectors, so it's not only high tech, not at all. What we do there, we actually work together with representatives of the private sector and education training providers and government on identifying technological trends. So it's constructing the technological map that include both hard and soft technologies. So hard technologies, I think you understand what we mean. But by soft technologies, we mean also potentially changes in the work organization, also how policies and regulations may influence the composition of tasks in a job or the way we work organization itself. And that, of course, all influence work tasks and therefore skills demand. So we discussed together what it means in terms of the skills gap. And then finally, in the final stage, there are recommendations and programs which are agreed together with stakeholders and everybody during the discussion, which is very much process-oriented. Every player commits itself to the implementation. So once you already implement such a foresight, you have a commitment. So for example, here I have an example of Armenia, which was where the foresight was implemented in 2 sectors, food processing and ICT precision engineering, where 5 programs for 2 sectors were agreed by all partners, and the partners already agreed who is doing what, when, and who is funding what, and where the money comes from. This wasn't funded from dialogue, only supported the foresight itself. It's the country that implemented the results. So it's a change management tool, which is very useful. This is another example, STET, Skills for Trade and Economic Diversification, also a sector-based skill needs anticipation activity for trading sectors. So those sectors that are involved in the international trade, and therefore they also need to improve their export performance, competitiveness, and also diversify their products as well as markets. So as you see, we have quite some tools on STET. And the program has been implemented in many, many countries, you see, around the world and many sectors around the world. It's a combination of middle income and low income countries, but in fact, it's a perfectly suitable tool for a higher income country, and I think for Greece as well. The development logic, or theory of change, if you want, which we have behind that tool, is that by developing the right skills, the skills which are really needed for the businesses, for the sector, we strengthen business capabilities of the sector. And that results in a greater productivity and market competitiveness of the sector. And then it also leads to more sales in traded markets and better competitiveness, and eventually reinvestment in the creation of more jobs and better jobs. So it's a kind of virtual circle which is beneficial for everybody. So these are some stages of the STED, which I'm not going into details, just to say that the sector selection is something we do together with partners. And then, of course, you can make it more analytical or less analytical. You can have a survey as part of the process implementation, but it's not the key. The key is interaction, because there's also a foresighting element within the interaction. And it's also a tool which is very much process-oriented, because the idea is that we come together to a conclusion of what is plausible for the sector in future, and what needs to be done. And that vision is validated by all sectoral actors. So as a result of such an approach, we usually have some implementation activities in the implementation phase. And it could be training in the initial vacation training or in continuing training, adult learning. It could be elaboration of competency standards, could be adaptation of curricula, could be capacity development, it could be planning as well as more skills anticipation, maybe for some specific occupations, labor market information. But what is also very often the case of the result of the STED approach is a system reform, when you build institutions, build platforms for sectoral social dialogue about skills. So this is just an example from Vietnam, and actually I used tourism sector, and that's why I chose Vietnam, because I thought that's something really relevant for Greece. But since there was really very useful presentation by the previous speaker, perhaps we don't need to go into detail. Anyway, the presentation will remain with you. And finally, new tool we just prepared in the framework of the response to the COVID-19 crisis. Since we couldn't really implement during the COVID-19 any of our interactive tools, no STED, no the skills technology foresight, so we had to come up with something different, something what we can implement quickly and fully online without face-to-face interaction. So we came up with these new guidelines on rapid assessment of reskilling and upskilling needs in response to the COVID-19 crisis, where online we survey sectors that are losing jobs. We are serving sectors that experience spikes in demand, such as the care sector, the delivery of goods and services sector, and the production of safety and health equipment. And we also interview people who either risk to lose jobs or are already affected by the loss of jobs, or just those ones who would like to change the job. And this triangulation actually helps to come up with conclusions on the immediate short-term retraining to put people back to work. Because as I started my presentation from, it's so important to put people back to work in this situation. And again, just a glimpse of finding, just to give you an idea. So this is the result from Kenya, from the part of employers survey, in which jobs has the decrease in employment been most significant. And you will see that in manufacturing, these are mostly manual workers, education sector, teachers, which is a very worrying sign. We will need them. We will need them badly for all reskilling, upskilling, and also the regular education training programs. And waiters in accommodation and food sector, as well as tour guides. You see, this is a very worrying sign, because part of these people, they didn't move to unemployment, as you remember, I already mentioned to you. They withdrew from the labor market, and it remains a question whether they would be able and whether they will have actually a chance also to come back into wage jobs. Again, another example from Kenya, these are the results of the individual survey, so the workers. They were also asked about what training would they like to have. And you see that in accommodation and food services sector, a lot of them mention, the training related to communication tools, which are specific for the COVID-19, and also using other digital technologies and computers. So the really digital skills, and I think the previous speaker mentioned that, and it's definitely confirmed through the global survey from other countries. The same result actually for the education sector. But what is also interesting in manufacturing, where you would think the skills needs are related to digitalization, or perhaps also to the production process, what they said, they mostly need, half of the respondents actually said, they mostly need skills working in teams where not everybody can be in place of work. These are remote teamwork, something new, which is also brought by the COVID-19. Very interesting. So this is where we have implemented the rapid skills assessment so far. And there are more and more requests coming to the ILO office, so we will be implementing more of those. This is just to show that we have some tools which might be useful also for the audience, which are specific for a megatrend or a policy on either trade or technology, or there was quite a lot mentioned by previous speakers about greening the full climate change agenda. So also we have a package of tools on skills for a greener future and how to identify and implement them. And we also have a number of generic tools that speak more about types of method and the process of integration of skill needs anticipation in policy definitions, including the sectoral level, working at sectoral level. Here we have the guide. So thank you very much. I think that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nisha.
Thank you very much, dear Olga. It was very explanatory, I believe, and it pointed out that we need to have the institutional background in order to go to the more specific items you mentioned. And sometimes talking about skill anticipation, it is not the reskilling and the upskilling that it is needed. It might be a system, a reform of the system. This has to be in our minds, because I think reskilling and upskilling specifically to sectors, it is needed, okay, but it is the easy thing to identify generally. Then we need to be more specific in what exactly do we mean by that, and digging down, we might come to a system reform, as you say. Thank you very much. Please stay with us so that if any questions arise, you will be the one to reply as far as skills anticipation is concerned. And now I'm passing to Eamon Devon, an expert with experience of 37 years, out of them 31 with the UK Ministry of Labour. And the last 10, he was mostly included in the delivery of projects for modernizing employment policies in Greece as well, advising the Greek PES, that this means it's where I met him, I think, or I met him in the EU, in the employment, and then I met him more often during his role. Let's try to share knowledges and experiences, and listen to him in order to inspire us, Eamon, about partnerships, the importance that we have been talking so many years, but still I am afraid we have it very narrow. Partnering between two organizations. In my mind, I have partnering with multi-stakeholders, with different scopes for the benefit of the citizens. Public and private, definitely, but multi, not one-to-one. The floor is yours, Eamon.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. And I think in your introduction, you explained clearly what I'm hoping to briefly outline, which hopefully sets a bit of a frame for our subsequent discussions after the presentation section of this event. I think partnerships are interesting in that we often only notice them when they're lacking or when they're not actually working. But I think I'd really start by making the statement that partnership working has probably never been more important than it is now. I mean, of course, as I think Venetia as well quite rightly said, partnerships have always been a feature of policy development, formulation, and of course, especially delivery. But perhaps now, with the great advances in data analysis, burgeoning artificial intelligence, the ubiquity of big data, we're really entering, or perhaps we've already arrived, in a situation where interagency collaboration is essential, not least to address skills mismatches, as several speakers have mentioned. And it's not, again, as was mentioned in the introduction, not just about bilateral, but it's trilateral, multinational partnerships, partnerships between public and private organisations, government delivery bodies and business, and indeed partnerships between the individual citizens, recipients of public services and the people actually delivering them. And I think it's quite important if we can try and really start to break down some of the more traditional discussions where there was sometimes a slightly binary debate about whether it was more important that a private or a public body or an NGO delivered a certain service. I think a lot of the recent agenda is moving into a consideration of a view that what's important is what works. What's important is that the way that different actors come together for the wider benefit of society, the economy, but most importantly for the benefit of individual citizens. So if we could move on to the next slide, please. Thank you very much. I think probably few people would disagree with the statement that the future of work has really arrived now. I think all previous technological leaps have generated concern and often some very, very worrying perspectives about massive future job loss. But I think fortunately history teaches us that eventually that normally proves not to be the case. Clearly change can be disruptive and labour market change particularly disruptive, and it will be unreasonable not to expect people most likely to be affected by disruption in the labour market not to be very concerned by it. There's a story which I think is actually a true story rather than the topical one, that one of the first significant industrial disputes in the UK was hundreds of years ago when there were programs to start to build more bridges over the River Thames, and the boatmen, who made a very good living conveying people from one side of the river to the other, couldn't conceive of any other jobs and thought that the technology to enable more building of bridges would be the end of their particular occupation. And of course, that was proven not to be the case. And I think I'd like to say that maybe sometime in the future, hopefully in a not too distant future, people will be again a lot more sanguine about the implications for changes in technology at the moment. So I think clearly experience largely teaches us that all the previous industrial revolutions, and we now talk about the fourth one, have eventually driven growth, productivity, much more prosperity, and created all kinds of jobs. The governor of OED, I think, made the very appropriate and apposite point in his intervention earlier that we don't even know which jobs are going to be around by the end of this decade. For anybody who has any past experience of looking at the classification criteria for jobs, they will note that increasingly those particular classifications are becoming out of date ever more quickly, because probably not every year but every month a new occupation is emerging, which is exciting and a particular challenge for people involved in data analysis. But I think the point is that COVID has clearly hastened progress on the digital agenda. A phrase I've heard mentioned by colleagues many times in the last 18 months is that COVID has driven 6 years predicted change into 6 months in terms of skills development. Organisations have been making all sorts of adjustments which they perhaps thought they would like to do. They might need them in the future, but didn't need them now. And they've had to adapt very quickly and thankfully very successfully to working in a far more virtual way. And indeed, OED in Greece have made some excellent and very swift adjustments to digital working and gave a very good example of how an organisation can adapt to what was, of course, for all of us, an entirely unforeseen situation. But I think the important point is that long-term unemployment in Europe remains high. I think that if the long-term unemployed were one member state, they would be the 8th or 7th biggest member state in the Union, which is quite a worrying and sad statistic. And even during periods of very tight labour markets and considerable economic growth, long-term unemployment remains a problem. And of course, for people thinking at the European and member state policy level, there is a real concern that the implications of COVID matched with the implications of rapid change with increased technological development, risk leaving the most vulnerable people, the long-term unemployed and discouraged workers even more at the back of the queue. And of course, Europe already has a difficult combination of skill shortages and an aging workforce. So if we could move on to the next slide, please. Thank you very much. So I think I'd like to really, if you go away with one thought from this particular session, it would be that partnerships are needed, and partnerships are perhaps the vital system which is required to try and ensure that the potentially adverse implications of these changes do not occur. So we need partnerships, I think, because social and economic problems are becoming more complex and more multifaceted. So we need more creative policy responses, and necessarily we need more inputs from a variety of actors to make sure we can cover all the bases, so to speak, to address a particular problem. I think this means that no one agency can or should even be solely responsible for formulating and delivering a policy response to address these multiple changes. And I think I'd also say that the social and economic integration of citizens, challenging and hopefully eventually eliminating social exclusion, can only be successfully dealt with at the micro level for the individual citizen, the most vulnerable people, when a group of agencies come together, because all of them often have parts of the jigsaw in their own respective experience, professionalism and toolbox to put that together in a personalised package which can address the needs of an individual person. I think cooperation is more cost efficient. Effective partnerships, of course, enable the pooling of expertise, and sometimes when they are very mature partnerships, the pooling of resources and funding. Partnerships can engender targeted, personalised responses to address particular barriers to labour market integration faced by individuals. And of course, partners involving lots of people with their own particular expertise, employment services coming together with social assistance providers, vet agencies, and of course, crucially, employers. They've all got a different perspective, and the best source of what works to move an individual from discouragement and labour market separation to integration in a good, secure job is clearly drawing on the expertise of all of those agents who can then enable a conclusion as to what works best. Moving on to the next slide, please. A phrase I think that's been most often spoken about in the last year or two is this idea of an ecosystem. We're hearing more and more, again, as the governor had mentioned at the start of our discussion, the idea of the labour market as an ecosystem. And there's also increasing discussion about partnerships as an ecosystem. Developing Venetia's, again, opening comments, it's no longer about a bilateral binary relationship between two actors. It's about a dynamic combination of potentially multiple agencies coming together at different speeds and different times to address particular problems, with the one focus that they should always be focused on the needs of the individual and what can best equip them to move towards labour market integration. So this ecosystem is essential to enable a dynamic response, formulating policies which can avoid placing people in precarious situations, enabling them to cope with change. Again, has been mentioned by several speakers, the idea of transitional labour markets is not a new idea. I think I first read about it, as colleagues did as well, perhaps 20, 25 years ago. But I think the point is now that the concept of a job for life, the role of an employment service to perhaps move somebody into a job as a once and final activity, that is becoming increasingly redundant. So the role of particularly public employment services will be increasingly about ensuring that the almost certainty of frequent transitions, these can be well managed to avoid the individual citizen falling into a precarious situation. And similarly, on the other side of the labour market equation, employers facing increasing changes, increasing pressures from competition based on the fact that the whole world of technology is moving so quickly, skills requirements becoming more urgent. It's absolutely important as well that a range of actors can be involved to inform those discussions, which very much mirrors the previous presentation from the ILO colleague looking at skills forecasting and predictions. So clearly the role of partners coming together is to help manage these transitions in the economy, in the labour market, as smoothly as possible. In order for partnerships to effectively work with an efficient combination of different partners, bringing their own specific expertise to the table, the partnerships must be data driven. We've now got increasing access to big data. increasing capability for analysing data and using it to predict what may work best in a particular situation. So it's important that partnerships draw on the widest possible source of data in order to formulate solutions to address problems of exclusion. So again, collaboration based on evidence as far as possible, and evidence from the great wealth of data which is increasingly available to enable that process to occur. Can we have the next slide, please? Can we have the move on to the next slide? Thank you very much. In terms of building partnerships, a number of reports have been written in recent years under the auspices of the European Union, looking at why partnerships are developed in certain ways and what kind of partnership might be the most successful one for a particular situation. The three reports written in the last 7 or 8 years by the European Union are interesting and would be worthy of perhaps a quick scan if you would like to look at some of the thinking about the concepts behind different partnership models. Some work which was commissioned by DG Employment in the European Union last year updated the whole concept of partnerships, trying to consider the way that partnerships were now evolving based on the fact that support organisations were becoming increasingly data-driven. And a model of 4 different sorts of partnerships emerged from a discussion from representatives from public employment services across about 12 member states. I think I'd stress that these are models, and of course, in reality, organisations will apply different partnerships in different situations, and of course, they will always sensibly, when managing organisations, apply an a la carte approach, which can involve elements of different sorts of partnership models to meet and address different sorts of problems. But in the most recent study, a typology of 4 sorts of partnerships was identified from analysis of a very large number of partnerships across the European Union. And I'll just briefly give a couple of moments elaboration of examples of these 4 different types of partnership models. Agile partnerships are based on actors coming together to deliver particularly quick solutions to a problem. In the European Union study, colleagues from Lithuania explained how there was a mandate from their government to do more to combine delivery of support services for young people, social assistance payments, and also the delivery of activation by public employment services. In Lithuania, as in many other member states, the responsibility for delivering certain programs connected with social assistance, and indeed some of the counselling for young people, was a municipal competence, whereas the public employment service, which is more typical, of course, was a member state level responsibility. And the government said, we think we need to work better. As several colleagues have said, the view was we need to cut across silos, and we want you to produce a new model so we can open some pilot combined service offices. And the Lithuanian colleagues were given an extremely tight timescale. And what I think they very intelligently and sensibly said to their politicians and their ministers was, yes, we can do this. We are very happy to cut across silos and work in a creative way, but we want you to try and allow us maximum scope to devise a solution to this issue without in advance you sort of specifying in particular detail what you want. So you give us a very clear objective, but don't start to fill out the detail, and we will then be responsible for fleshing out the detail of an administrative arrangement which meets this requirement. We will make sure that the respective positions of our own individual agencies are adequately protected in the discussions, but we will operate in a spirit of cooperation in an informal, very open dialogue to produce a solution within a very tight timescale. And indeed, I think within about a year, a group of actors from different agencies who had never really closely collaborated before were able to deliver a pilot office which was open, and they were even able to adapt this delivery model to a digital delivery system, because no sooner had they managed to come up with a very quick creative response COVID arrived, but the office was able to very successfully convert to digital working as well, which I think is a tribute to that particular way of working. A more familiar approach to partnerships, perhaps with colleagues, will be the notion of subcontracting. I think the reasons for subcontracting are probably very well understood, but just to perhaps reiterate some of the main ones briefly. Clearly, no organisation is ever a source of all expertise on a certain subject. So sometimes there is a very specialist need which emerges. It may be the employment integration of a group with particular specific niche issues which need to be resolved. Sometimes there can be an issue where there is a lack of resource and capacity to deliver on a new and expanded policy or political mandate, and sometimes another organisation is more easily able to access the resources, whether it is the funding or the staffing to enable extra capacity to be delivered. If it's extra resource needed for sometimes addressing a situation which can be one which could be considered quite high risk, it can be the opportunity for a commissioning organisation to transfer some of the risk through a well-constructed contractual arrangement to a delivery partner. And there are many, many examples of subcontracting delivery partnerships across Europe, particularly in the field of employment services, but of course, many other areas of social policy delivery. One of the most recent and interesting examples which emerged from the European Union discussion was the idea of co-constructed partnerships, which perhaps colleagues may be slightly less familiar with. And the idea of co-construction is that in certain situations, the only way or the way to achieve the optimum outcome is to actually very closely include potentially beneficiaries of a certain program in a design of the policy being delivered to alleviate their particular problem, or if one or more actors are coming together to address a certain issue, they are of equal status. So it is not where, for instance, in the world of employment services, sometimes a Ministry of Labour or a PES, Public Employment Service, will subcontract with a private partner in a delivery agenda, perhaps to reintegrate long-term unemployed people or addressing other labour market dysfunctions and problems. But in a co-constructed partnership, the notion is that the partners are actually equal. So if I may use the phrase, the power relationship is not contractor and deliverer, it is actually equal partners for devising the policy to address a certain issue. We had during the discussion a couple of fascinating examples from Belgium, where Actiris, the Brussels Region Public Employment Service, are very involved in co-construction partnerships, and they have particularly pursued this through the method of social impact bonds. They were given a mandate to try and do more to improve the employment rates of ex-offenders, people being discharged from prison, for reasons I think that are clearly understood by colleagues. I think ex-offenders, people with previous criminal records, are often in one of the most difficult situations in terms of finding them work when they are released from prison. And in most member states, there is research that there can be high recidivism or reoffending rates, particularly where ex-offenders are unable to find work. So clearly an agenda that needs to be addressed. Finding government funding to invest in programs specifically focused on groups where there may be a high risk of failure or not particularly high success rates can be a challenging issue. And Actiris contacted a group of social investors who were prepared to invest money in social impact bonds, which only achieved a return on investment with certain levels of labour market integration for these people being released from prison. But what the investors said was, we are happy to invest our money in real terms in a program. We are happy to take the risk that we get a return if the programs work, but not if they do not achieve a certain delivery standard. But they said, we will only do this if we are equal partners in designing programs with you. And there is some evidence of success in this rather challenging area through using a co-constructed partnership model. And perhaps finally, supported partnerships. We had an example from Germany where there is an initiative called the Cliche Free Initiative, where hundreds of organizations across all areas of the economy, society, different social policy organizations, they have one agenda, which is to exchange ideas in any shape or form, which can try and introduce a more gender neutral society and break down barriers which result in gender discrimination across society in general. And the partnership acts on the basis that any organisation who opts to join is free to participate in ad hoc discussions, produce papers, post a message they would like to speak to others with a certain interest in solving a problem. And indeed, this has often proven to be a very successful mechanism for spreading important and interesting good practice attacking gender discrimination across many different delivery areas. If we could have the next slide, please. Thank you very much. Clearly, partnerships are changing because of technology. Technology, of course, means that the world is moving much more quickly. Technology can facilitate much more effective partnership working. I was involved working for the UK Employment Service 30 years ago in many partnerships with different actors, but partnership working was quite slow. We had to convene a meeting, and we had to probably in those days post or maybe just fax an agenda, and information exchange was not frequent. And so the progress of partnerships could perhaps be slower. These days, a partnership can be happening all the time because we can simply have the instantaneous real-time exchange of information and data. Clearly, partnerships are important, particularly in the world of labour market integration, not least because, as colleagues have mentioned, many of the employment growth sectors going forward, if not all of them, will be very much based on the increased usage and harvesting of data and higher specification IT systems. So it will not be possible for partners to operate in a way that meets the new employment challenges if they're not obviously utilising technology themselves. Support services, of course, involved in using technology in their own partnerships can encourage their beneficiaries and their citizens to adapt to using technology as well. Big data offers the opportunity for, of course, partners to, in real time, assess what is actually happening. Several employment services now have a situation where groups of partners can come together and exchange information in real time, and individual job seekers can report back in real time to counsellors exactly what is happening in terms of their job search activity. So it's no longer an agenda where that particular partnership can only be operating through an appointment where the citizen talks to their case manager from the employment service every month or every few months. They're now able in real time at the most appropriate time to exchange information, and so that particular partnership can be a far more fruitful one because it's based on the most recent intelligence. And on that basis, of course, technology can help partners to co-construct their reintegration journeys with the people providing the services, particularly the public employment services. So clearly, what partnerships are doing is breaking down silos. Again, a couple of colleagues have mentioned how in the past, I think in all countries, government organisations have not always been good at bridging silos. They've often been more inward looking than outward looking. And I think the point is now that even if organisations wanted to maintain that stance, and I'm sure of course that they don't, it would probably be impossible for them to do so. Because even if government agencies, NGOs, government ministries decided that they were determined to simply work in splendid isolation, the world around them is involved in an ongoing, frequent and perpetual conversation. And so they would simply not be able to opt out of partnership working, even if they were trying to do so. At a European Union event about 2 months ago, a colleague from Sweden was talking about the growth of the partnership ecosystem in that country. And he said what he had discovered almost unexpectedly was that the Swedish Public Employment Service wanted to make the best use it could of harvesting data sources as widely as possible to try and build up the richest picture of the factors influencing the labour market and what the barriers might be to an individual finding a journey back into work and what the solutions might be to help them. And he had a view about the kind of range of data and the kind of boundary around the data set which might be applied to an individual. And he said, of course, that as soon as he and colleagues embarked on this journey, they were quickly involved in a process where one set of data was connected to another set of data that they were unaware of from the Public Employment Service when they started this process. And he said, of course, that in a way, the capacity is almost infinite and everything is potentially connected to everything else. And so the challenge is perhaps a stimulating and a good challenge to have, but one which can be quite daunting. I think quite soon, if not already, the challenge is not for support organisations a lack of information, but how they can, when they need to, constrain the information to use it in a way which can ensure that it is understandable by people they are talking with in terms of both their other stakeholders and most importantly, the citizens who they are serving. Of course, more effective data warehousing is enabling more sophisticated analytical tools to be developed. And indeed, OED, the Greek Employment Service, are now using some really excellent labour market analysis to look at the spatial dimensions of unemployment across Greece and what the implications can be for the labour market dynamics in certain regions. And indeed, without unfortunately having time to go into any detail, these kind of initiatives have got incredible potential for giving all the help that frontline advisors need to be able to improve and give even richer and more relevant advice to the unemployed people using the employment service. So just moving on to the final slide, please. Thank you very much. So in terms of just a few conclusions, I think this phrase is exactly that which was used by Venetia at the start of our event. Pre-existing trends have been exacerbated by COVID considerably. There are increasing challenges for job seekers and employers, for employers to be able to keep up with the skills demands and get the supply of labour that they need, for job seekers to be able to understand their position on the labour market, make the most informed choices and be able to receive the information they require to take advantage of what I'm sure will be all sorts of interesting and increasing opportunities, including in sectors that we at the moment cannot even predict. I think I'd say that partnership working is intrinsically beneficial to promote mutual learning. Effective partnerships do mean that the whole is much bigger than the sum of the parts. I think you can always do more to work successfully. More integration, effective integration of services needed, and will continue to be needed. And I think there is some evidence that a logical consequence of improved connectivity between organisations may be the establishment of virtual organisations where, for a certain problem, a group of actors from different pieces of their respective administrations start to work as a new virtual organisation where they can pool resources and staff to address a problem, and the distinction between organisations can largely become collapsed. In Finland, long-term unemployed people are now served by case handlers who can be from one of a number of organisations, and the organisation from which they are notionally attached can become irrelevant. So if somebody who is a housing expert starts to being involved in dialogue with an unemployed person, if that person has a particular barrier related to a housing problem, their case manager in this case will be able to also offer more in-depth support. If it emerges, however, their problem is very related to a health issue, the case manager will still act as their kind of overall support and steer their journey back to work, but they will hand off a deeper problem to a professional from a health organisation, but they will act as the continuity factor in a person's journey back to work, but the breadth and depth of their intervention will depend on the particular process. And indeed, colleagues in Finland have said that the distinction between different support services and administrative barriers becomes increasingly invisible to the service user, and the degree of pooling of resources between organisations is the natural consequence to support this extremely customer and citizen-centric service. The structure of partnerships will vary on a case-by-case basis. I think the same group of actors will come together for a certain time, but clearly a partnership may well outlive its usefulness when a problem has been resolved or the frame of the partnership changes, it will be important for the partnership to perhaps be decommissioned, some partners to leave or new partners to join. But I think I would just leave you with the thought that partnerships, I think, can clearly offer one, if not the most promising vehicle to improve the labour market integration of job seekers. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, dear Raymond. I take your last words, not famous last words, that it can be a vehicle. And now that we have Elon Musk or all these fantastic things, it can be a modern vehicle, not just a vehicle. And I hope that in the near future, we will stop discussing about the why and move our discussion to the how, why they are, which will be beneficial, not why it is beneficial, I hope. So now we are moving to Mrs. Lisa Simmons. She is the Vice President of Domestic and Global Operations. We are very happy to have her with us. She has been for the last 23 years designing and implementing innovative programs to improve the lives of families, children, vulnerable populations across the globe. And in this across the globe is Italy, is Singapore, is South Korea, is Sweden. So a variety of countries with very different cultures and national GDP level. She will spend most of her intervention for today on explaining how Maximus achieved to produce tangible results in a new territory, and allow me to say within a very hostile environment, meaning that once you have moved there, there was the outburst of the COVID.
Correct.
So, Mrs. Simmons, we are full of ears. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Could we please pull up the presentation? And we can go to slide 2. Thanks so much. The next slide. Thank you. So good afternoon. Thank you for having me. I'm Lisa Simmons, Lead Vice President of Domestic and Global Operations for Maximus. Maximus is the leading provider of health and human services worldwide. We have been delivering employment programs across many different geographies for over 40 years. We are driven by a mission to strengthen communities and to improve the lives of those we serve on behalf of government. Our programs are designed to reclaim vulnerable individuals and their families, reconnect them to employment and community supports, and rebuild their lives through training and employment opportunities that lead to self-sufficiency. Next slide, please. So why the Maximus model? Maximus understands what works, and we are poised to help move the global economy forward. Our model drives innovation, creativity, and collaboration. Our leadership teams are industry experts who help shape and operationalize public policy. So what does the Maximus model offer to government clients? We offer a very scalable and flexible client choice model that is designed to meet each and every job seeker exactly where they are in the employment journey, which is extremely important in a post-pandemic environment. We provide subject matter expertise that serve as navigators, helping guide the candidates through the employment journey. Of course, this journey is supported by technology and systems and streamlined processes that drive accountability and outcomes. We also manage and monitor the efforts to those outcomes. We understand that clients need to recognize that everything that they are doing is being valued and being tracked and is leading towards self-sufficiency for their families. We also provide service coordination and collaboration, which are both hallmarks of our model. We understand the importance of leveraging the expertise of our community partners and working with them to provide greater access to employment and training opportunities. Our employer engagement team supports our employer partners. These employer partnerships are also a hallmark of what we do every day. We are charged with educating our employers on the program. We help them identify government assistance to sustain. We help them identify government incentives and the benefits of working with our job seekers. And finally, we offer a very robust outreach and engagement model that is powered by social integration networking. Next slide, please. So Italy, dear to my heart. So Maximus hit the ground running in Italy in 2019. And in just under 20 months, we had grown into a trusted provider supporting vulnerable populations across 2 regions. We had a great relationship and rapport with our government client. So let's talk a little bit about what that snapshot looked like and our footprint. We were an accredited provider in 2 regions, Lombardy and Emilia-Romagna. We currently operate 4 offices in Lombardy and 5 offices in Emilia-Romagna. Those offices are supported by, I believe we're up to 57 dedicated experts in employment services. And we operate 1 youth-focused employment services program and 2 adult-focused employment services program across the regions. So before I jump into what happened once we landed in 2019, let's take a closer look at the marketplace when we entered Italy. Next slide, please. So I'll start with the landscape of services. The employment programs in Italy are truly designed and managed by the regional government. The main source of funding, of course, comes from the European Social Fund. These services can be delivered by accredited public and or private operators. In Lombardy, you can, both accredited and private operators can deliver services. In Emilia-Romagna, only the private operators deliver service offerings. The scope of the program varies across the regions, so we had to adjust to the regions that we were operating in. And most of the programs are outcomes focused, very prescriptive, which oftentimes limits what the providers are able to innovate, and personalize the service offering. So we have to be very structured in our approach to the job seeker service delivery. But we were able to bring some innovation and creativity from across the globe and share best practices with our Italian clients. The job seekers are profiled into 4 different types in 4 categories. Those categories run from the easiest to place into employment to what we define as the hardest to serve. And at the point of engagement, we identify which path this particular job seeker will take through our program and what program assignment they will have. All of the job seekers have a personal budget, and they are not to exceed that personal budget in Italy. So now let's take a look at how Maximus prepared for and performed in this particular environment. And that we can go to the next slide, please. So before we landed in Italy, our BD team and some of the leadership here at Maximus, we spent a lot of time engaging in discussions with the local experts, the stakeholders, and many of the potential partners to help understand how Maximus could partner with the Italian government and clearly serve the citizens so that we would be able to move the economy forward. So based on those initial conversations, the immediate need, and the long-term strategy to grow the economy, Maximus decided at that time to purchase a small provider. And once we purchased that small provider, we immediately increased the staff size so that we can open new offices and welcome our first job seekers in. Little did we know that right after opening our door, the world would be thrust into the biggest pandemic of our generation. But thankfully, this did not deter our service offerings. Our staff were resilient. It was a challenge, I believe, that Maximus was prepared to face. We felt that we had an obligation toward the job seekers that we had started to engage. Our government clients that we had gained their trust at this point and our team that were on the ground. So fast forward to May 2021, despite the incredible challenges associated with COVID-19, multiple lockdowns with businesses and people unable to move around, Maximus not only continued to operate, but we continued to grow. You know, we enrolled over 1,700 job seekers into our program, and nearly 600 of those individuals started employment. Noteworthy results from our team. We moved our operations online and took our operations from an operations from a underperforming provider in Emilia-Romagna. We took over operations on behalf of that provider. We engaged with that provider's team, hired those individuals to join the Maximus team, and we were able to start up operations within 2 weeks. Again, noteworthy results by the team that's on the ground in Italy. Next slide, please. Since moving to virtual operations, we have delivered over 25,000 hours of services, and this includes one-on-one case management. Our case management model is a replication of our trauma-informed case management that we do in Washington, D.C. And we started using trauma-informed case management right away because we recognized that many of the job seekers who had engaged with us right away and many of our employees were experiencing difficult times trying to navigate the employment market and navigate working from home and seeking employment from home and trying to serve in the multiple roles they have to serve in: parent, child, now homeschool teacher. So a lot of our participants and a lot of our employees were really struggling with operating in a virtual environment. So a lot of our trauma-informed case management really was helpful. We promoted our job seekers to employers through running virtual job fairs, and we created video CVs to make them stand out in the market. None of the competition was creating video CVs at the time, so a lot of the employers were reaching out to Maximus employment engagement officers as soon as they were receiving those CVs, the videos, and saying they were absolutely interested in engaging with our participants, which meant that our employment numbers were increasing right away. So as an operator, when we started to notice the negative work behaviors that had a direct impact on worker and company productivity, not only did we implement the trauma-informed case management, but we also implemented well-being check-ins. And we did these well-being check-ins with all of the participants that were engaged with our project. So our staff would call the participants and the job seekers that had landed employment to check in with them to see how they were maintaining throughout the pandemic and to see if there were any in-work supports that our frontline staff could provide. In doing so, we were able to not only engage the participants, we were able to engage their families and provide support services to them as well. So what did the Maximus leadership decide at that time? We decided that we needed to turn that engagement lens inward, and we started conducting well-being check-ins with our staff on an individual basis and in planning sessions where all of the staff would come into a meeting and we would go over what was happening in their caseloads. We would go over what was happening in their personal lives without sharing too much personal information on those calls. But we had some experts come in to talk our teams through some of the trauma that they were experiencing secondhand on a daily basis. Next slide, please. So we all recognize, and I think a lot of the colleagues here on this phone have talked about partnerships. Partnerships absolutely drive performance and cost savings. Now more than ever, we must collectively ensure that we avoid working in silos. We must bring to the table a coordinated effort around service offerings and afford the job seekers a seamless journey into self-sufficiency. Experience has shown all of us that the time of working in silos is over. We definitely must collaborate and create joint service plans to ensure that the most vulnerable populations receive the right services and support at the right time and from the right service partners. This will require that government entities, for-profits, nonprofits, faith-based organizations, and community organizations continue to work together, as we all have a significant role to play as we move the economy forward. Next slide, please. So as we think about navigating the post-pandemic labor market, we are already seeing some of the following issues, and a lot of the colleagues that presented ahead of me have already mentioned these things, so I'll briefly discuss. The job seeker supply is exceeding demand. Businesses are slowly starting to reopen. We expect to see a larger number of applicants for each job opening. When we work with employers, generally the Maximus rule of thumb is that every employer needs to interview at least and receive at least 3 qualified job seekers for every opening. In the interim, we should expect that the job seekers will express frustration when they're submitting a lot of applications, but the result is not always employment. So we must be prepared to support those job seekers through that process and keep them engaged and keep them on the path to self-sufficiency. We understand that the worker demand by industry and job type is uneven as well. Industries that have played a significant role in helping manage the pandemic crisis will find themselves overstaffed and having to lay off employees. For example, some of the logistics and the food industry companies and the companies producing medical equipment will definitely begin to lay off employees, but we must be prepared to help those employers. So the Maximus employer engagement team, often we're seen as the go-to source for employers. And what we do is we substitute the employer HR department services for the services that our teams provide, because many of the employers in Italy are small and medium-sized businesses. So they are not always qualified and or able or have the capacity to really move the needle forward in terms of getting the right individuals in place, getting those individuals trained for the jobs that they need to fill, and getting all of the vacancies filled in a timely manner so that their businesses don't suffer. So what we tend to do is we work with employment associations and trade unions with those employers to better understand the hiring needs, and we analyze the skill sets and the skill gaps so that we're better able to fill those vacancies. And in doing so, we're creating career pathways for our job seekers, but we're also creating bridge training on behalf of the employers to make their lives much easier and make our job seekers more susceptible to going to work for them and meeting their specific skills. Next slide, please. So how do we move the needle forward as a collective? There's no more business as usual. Employment policies must be agile and flexible. Policymakers are in a unique position to drive the way policies are delivered. Providers require flexibility to be creative and innovative. We must often keep that in mind. Active labor market programs can serve as the accelerator to build a much stronger and more resilient labor market, a labor market that reflects an active workforce and engaged employers. But we have to think outside the box and allow innovation and evidence-informed best practices to help shape the type of support services and employment preparation we provide to our post-pandemic job seekers. We must look to automation and new technologies and new ways of recruiting and engaging the workforce. It's more than an investment in human capital in our global economy. It is a tremendous opportunity from where I sit to promote inclusive growth and an active participation. So I'm hopeful that you guys gleaned a lot from what I shared with you today. And thank you so much on behalf of Maximus for your time today. It has been an absolute pleasure to present to such a distinguished group. Thank you again.
Dear Ms. Simmons, we thank you very much for your concise but very juicy presentation. You tackled a few points that I'm not sure we can cover in the Greek environment. As you mentioned that you have collaborated with unions on finding out more opportunities, etc. I doubt if unions will start collaborating with employment services in Greece, we need to continue sharing our experiences with them, definitely, so that they will come and provide inclusive solutions, as you said. And you said that we have to rely on digital services while providing employment services, and these have to be harmonized among public and private services as well, don't you think? I mean, there are certain steps that facilitate these partnerships, but it was very interesting and very open-minded presentation, especially the fact that you were ready to operate through the pandemic. You were resilient and ready to operate, and you had identified your task versus the society, your own staff, and the unemployed people. Fantastic. I would like to introduce in the panel Mrs. Anya Mendrek, who is Business Development Director, Global Group for Europe, who has been an initial, teasing for us to learn about new methods of working and to a major partner, let's say, in sharing European knowledge. And after the quite a few talks that we have been doing, I think she has some things to pinpoint out of our discussion on partnerships and on private and public cooperation. Anya?
Yes, thank you very much, Venetia, and thank you to the Chamber for organizing the event. And Maximus is delighted to be partner and present our case study from Northern Italy. But as Lisa shared and many colleagues, we've experienced the pandemic across the world, and Maximus is an organization that is ready to stand up to the challenge and bring its capacity and competencies to support job seekers, employers, and partners whenever we're needed. And I think it has been emphasized, and I think it needs to be emphasized more and more, that no more working in silos. We need to work in partnerships. We need to be able to forge friendships, I would say, not just partnerships, among many different players on the labor market to support a flexible and agile and future resilient labor force. It's about bringing what's the best out of all of us, joining forces, making sure that we understand the needs of the job seekers, the needs of the employers, the needs of industries as they develop, and the way the market changes. Whether this is about soft skills, transferable skills, whether it's about hard vocational training, or just ability to navigate the complexities of the labor market. These are all really important elements that we can all contribute to find the solutions for our job seekers. And as you have mentioned, I think there are many, many challenges ahead of us, but I see, and we as Maximus, we see it as enormous opportunities. With the recovery plan that is coming to Europe, Greece has submitted an incredibly, I would say, professionally and thoughtful program to the Commission. I think it looks at addressing all those challenges in a very practical and pragmatic and future-oriented manner. We see Italian regions were extremely happy with the collaboration that we have forged in Lombardy and in Emilia-Romagna. We're hoping that we will be able to form partnerships in other regions. And I think only this way is will enable us to move forward. And this is something that we have learned over the 40 years of operating as employment services, as workforce development organization. There's many lessons that we've learned, and we're first to say we need to continue learning. So lifelong learning, not only for job seekers, not only for individual citizens, but also for organizations, for providers, for employers, for industry. So I think in that context, we're really excited to share our knowledge, to share our practices, to promote best practice that we've seen in other organizations, in other programs, and be able to have the voice and support the development of workforce, labor market, and grow the economy. Thank you.
We thank you very much. You really inspire us. We thank you very much, Anya. I think you really inspired us. I have noted down about friendships and creating, an environment of true and honest dialogue, which is based on trust, as we all know. You also mentioned that we make sure that we understand the skills needed. I think everybody claims that they understand the skills. How do we make that happen on data, of course, but everybody claims, evidence-based policy making is not so often, so it is not met so often. How can we go to that next level for me? Because everybody claims that we understand the data, and we are sure that the Greek market needs reskilling and upskilling in all cases, is seen as a panacea. How do we make this happen? Can you help us? Or anybody from the panel that they are listening now to, okay, we are coming as a panel. Anybody else who can reply to my question? If not,
I think there's something important.
Okay,
I think there's something important about data sometimes being disaggregated as well. If we only look at data at a kind of summary macro level, it can tell us certain things, but you need to actually drill down quite a lot. And maybe we don't often do enough to actually drill down, look to very specific factors, sometimes quite local factors, and maybe spend a bit more time looking at the context, perhaps.
Tiziano, do you have anything to share about that? Because you have tremendous involvement between the two parties. I mean, private-public partnerships that they didn't so much, did not exist in the past. Do you have any advice on that and how you can make more sure that we really understand each other?
The way that we have chosen with the partnership between private and public employment services is definitely the way that we use usually the labor market, the active measure and the public employment services. The private give us specialized services, and at the moment the system has a good equilibrium. It's fine because we can usually give the services, the labor services to all our unemployed people.
Thank you. Ms. Louizou, did you learn anything from our, don't be polite to ask me, did you learn anything that triggered your mind about partnerships and unemployed people and how skills they could empower them? You have a fantastic program. I mean, I was impressed by listening to you. But anyway, knowing that partnerships are not so familiar in Greece about skills and understanding the needs, the real needs, so that the people will find the job after their reskilling or upskilling. Did our presentation give you any ideas? If you don't want to ask, I will understand as well.
No, it is really important to find a way to mobilize a mechanism to exactly identify the needs of the market. And in Greece, there is a lack of such a mechanism. I was really happy, we were all happy to really hear Mr. Protopsaltis, who announced the National Skills Strategy, the Ministry of Labor, and we are in close cooperation together, all the market and the economy, let's say, ministries, so as to really understand the needs of the market. It is really true also that here in Greece, the unions have not really developed themselves a process of identifying the needs of the workforce, and we're lagging behind in this part, and it is really important to give them incentives to participate in an active way to this process. And I could even say that maybe because of European funds, it is that it is also the private sector that is not mobilized, and they wait everything from the state. And I think that we should really create the conditions that we all do what we need to do. The state is for the strategy, but we really need to have the input from the private sector in order to have a real strategy that can really, let's say, meet the needs of the present and the future. And the crisis of the pandemic really made this need even bigger, so as to really identify and have a mechanism to move forward and not reply now to the needs of the past, but create the environment to meet the needs of the future.
This is very interesting.
Most of the presentations really highlighted very interesting, let's say, points of view, and we will be really happy to further elaborate on these issues.
Thank you very much. I liked the point that you said the private sector needs to be mobilized because they are relying a lot on subsidies from the funds. And I think it would be beneficial for all the society to have co-constructed partnerships, as Eamon mentioned, where all partners will have equal responsibilities and equal accountabilities and equal share in the benefit. We used to have an example of that in the past. It is time to have more examples. Do you have any comments, Olga? As you are fond of partnerships and how processing on that. Any final comments? Because we have met our time allowed, but I would like to have a final comment from all of you.
Well, I mentioned some examples during the presentation of sectoral skills bodies, because I really believe for sectoral level collaboration and coordination, but of course it doesn't mean that at national level there shouldn't be similar platforms. I think it's important to have in the framework of this skills ecosystem, which was also mentioned by some speakers to have all parties represented, employers, trade unions, education, training providers, but also those who are responsible for the design, for the qualifications and curricula formulation and update. So the private sector, as well as now education, training, and government, multi-ministerial, because it's really not a question of the Ministry of Education alone. It's not a question of Ministry of Labor alone. Lifelong learning is really the challenge for the whole society and the economy, and that's why it has to be cross-sectorial, cross-ministerial. And the same, I think, is important also for financing. It's a major challenge. We haven't really discussed that much, but in order to meet the challenge of providing really the massive reskilling and upskilling, and as well as initial education and training, we need to mobilize that funding from multiple sources. And that requires also a lot of social innovation in terms of how we incentivize private sector to contribute, how we incentivize workers also to contribute, but also to sustain, of course, the regular and stable funding from government, because this is the core also to make sure that there is some equity mechanism. Government usually follows some bigger priorities, through active labor market policies or other policy measures. You can target specific groups that are at the disadvantage, because other parties may not do that. It may not be the target for employers, and these people will not be able to fund themselves, especially the low-skilled people. They are usually also coming from low-income households, and there is also kind of, it's a little bit like a snowball of disadvantages, and it's basically multiplying one another. That's why the equity mechanisms have to be sustained through stable funding by government. But I think the one thing which I wanted really to say while listening to all of you is about the whole issue of how easy it is to form partnerships. And I think it's actually not very difficult if you have a project with a specific target, with specific objectives. It's not difficult to form a partnership. What is difficult is to sustain that partnership. Yeah, because the project is finished, the partnership falls apart. What to do with that? So for this, we need the seed funding from government, not really covering everything, but seed funding from government. And what we also need is to identify clearly objectives that would be interesting for all. Because when you discuss why trade unions are not involved, we need to incentivize them. I think that if trade unions realize how useful that partnership may be for their membership, they will join in, no doubt. I'm not doubting that at all. And the same concerns their employers, private sector. Very often you hear the complaint why employers don't know which skills will be needed, why don't they participate enough in partnerships. But in my experience, they all do, if they realize that partnership will increase, for example, productivity and competitiveness of their enterprise, of their business, and the overall sector eventually. The same concerns trade unions. If they realize what would be the benefit for their membership, for workers, from this concrete partnership, it will be a lasting partnership for sure. That's why now I was also a little bit promoting the approaches which are very participative, and that become a change management tool, through shared diagnosis, through shared vision. You basically, the process becomes in itself an objective. Thank you.
I thank you very much. Do you have any final comments, Mrs. Simmons, or anybody else?
Yeah, sure. I just wanted to piggyback off of what Olga said regarding the partnerships. Oftentimes, partnerships are not sustained because when we enter into a partnership, we fail to let those partners operate in their expertise. We start shifting roles and responsibilities. When we think about collaboration and service coordination, the idea of the partnership is to identify those who complement your model and are able to serve the vulnerable populations that we're trying to move into employment. And when we do that, this is how we're able to work with the unions across the globe. It's because we're entering the situation with the unions as a partner. We're not suggesting that they operate differently. We're suggesting they operate using their expertise, but they partner with us because we have the same goal. We want the employees to sustain and have living wages and be able to keep their jobs and move into a self-sufficient lifestyle. So once you identify what the roles and responsibilities are, and you are very clear about, we want you to operate in your expertise, partnerships will sustain. It's just something to consider.
Thank you very much. Just a clarification from Mrs. Louisou that the 1 billion euros project Mr. Protopsaltis has referred previously is not only for human resources of the tourism sector, but it's for the national skills strategy as a whole. And I like that I read that the tourism sector has designed programs both for the employed and the unemployed. If nobody else has anything else to add, I would like to conclude our fantastic panel with exactly how Olga finished, that I imagine that we are in front of a change leadership project, and we need to find out what's in it for me in each and every partner that we would like them to have a partnership with us and be the ones that we promote this new thing. Definitely some roles have to change, and we need all of us learn to cooperate while we are remotely. I thank you very much, all of you, for your participation and useful advice that you have plentifully and generously shared with us. And I believe that this discussion will continue, maybe not on camera, but it has to continue. Thank you very much.